Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
The more you do it, the more awareness you gain. And for me, it's turned into this, okay, so this anxiety is really intense right now. But guess what? I'm going to channel that into this piece that I'm working on. At that place where the coping skill has turned into leaning into that intensity and then feeling the emotion. And then when you're performing or doing that thing, you're going to be moved, and I might cry or I might well up somehow and just feel totally emotional. And that's the part that I lean into, and that's the part I really hold on to as a coping skill. Rather than avoid it, I'm going to integrate it into my work. And I'm going to pour all of that into whatever I'm doing, a performance, and especially because that's probably one of the most important aspects of it. You want to present something and you want to invite the audience to go on this journey with you.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and if anxiety has ever kept you from being creative, you're going to love this conversation with my guest, Gregory Halpen. With over 30 years experience as a gay men's leadership coach, solo theater artist, stage and TV actor, and singer, Gregory helps others as a creative practice coach. An important part of that coaching is finding a way to turn a creative block like anxiety into a creative advantage. And that's what we talk about today. In our conversation, we cover the way anxiety manifests itself in the creative process and blocks it, the new creative process you need so you can accept and work with the anxiety, and the way to turn that anxious energy into creativity so it becomes an advantage. Gregory is so heartfelt and shares deeply about his life, loss, and big turning points that lead him to where he is today. We finish our conversation with specific steps to take, essentially a framework you can modify to acknowledge and understand your anxiety, and then find ways to interrupt and redirect it. I can think of so many ways that you could do that, but one quick way I'll mention is my 2-minute transition meditation. You can request the audio for free at positivelyproductive.com/transition. Be sure to listen to the end of the episode for other episode suggestions that complement this conversation beautifully. Now let's join Gregory. Gregory, welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you.
Lisa, me too. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
We have such a good topic today to support our fellow creatives. But before we dig into that, I'd love it if you'd tell us a little bit about who you are and what makes you light up.
What makes me light up is obviously creativity. I've always been creative since I was a little boy, and I definitely inherited it from my mom because she was always around the house doing something creative, taking something, maybe from the street, bringing it inside and turning it into something really beautiful, because we didn't really have a lot growing up. So she would just take like the floor in the living room. The tiles were coming up, so she painted the whole living room floor black and swirled orange paint over it. It's the 70s, so it was like perfect. It was like a little disco in there.
I mean, she was ahead of her time with like upcycling and things like that, right?
Yeah, she would pull us, me and my little brother aside, and she would try to draw our portraits and do all these really cool things. And she sang beautifully. Her voice was very beautiful.
You're continuing that legacy, right? We were talking before we started
Yes.
recording about using our mics for singing as well.
Yes. I look at it as carrying on something that she didn't really know how to do, how to turn it into something more professional, as she always talked about.
I love that. And so not only are you doing creative things and like carrying on that legacy, but you are also helping others as well, right?
Yeah, I'm a creative practice coach, and I didn't really realize that's what I wanted to do because until recently, actually, I've been working on this solo play that I'm writing, and I've been working with this person, a coach, for over a year, and I leaned into this internal place where, the creative process happens, like those little personal things that keep you inspired, that keep you motivated when you're stuck on something. You could just pull from that. Because sometimes we need that in life. We need that internal kick in the butt.
Yeah, that thing that draws us, that keeps us going even when there are so many reasons and stories and thoughts and messages that say not to, right?
Yeah, because sometimes you think you're not allowed to create a certain way. You're not allowed to have a voice in your own creative work because you're listening to outside forces, outside voices, outside messages. And that's also sometimes how creatives who tend to feel stuck or tend to not know how to move forward with their creativity because they're trying to find the answers on the outside rather than listening to their guts.
This feels like the segue into our focus for today, right? This idea of dealing with anxiety as a creative and actually leveraging that for your benefit to a creative advantage, basically. So let's start at the very beginning and let's start with this idea of having anxiety, and I guess maybe what either you've experienced or what you've seen with clients in terms of maybe how it specifically manifests as a creative. What are we talking about when we say anxiety, and how is it conflicting potentially with our creativity?
Yeah, I have experienced a certain level of anxiety since I was a little boy, just experiencing a degree of childhood trauma and all that chaos that happened. So I experienced panic attacks as a little boy, just like constantly having this tight knot in my stomach. So I carried that throughout my life, and I didn't realize how much of an issue it was. It did get in the way of auditioning, it got in the way of learning new material. And when I had moments of clarity and I would book a really good show, a good musical in a regional theater, I would start out great within the first part of the rehearsal process. Then my anxiety would kick in, and then I would just be so scattered and not grounded. And I actually got fired from a show one time because I could tell like I wasn't focused. I booked it because the audition was great, but when I started rehearsing, it wasn't so great. And I didn't really know why until I started therapy and until I started working with people. And it just hit me. I'm like, wow, this is what's happening. It's my anxiety. So I had to lean into that and to lean into that and understand and pinpoint like what triggers me to have a flare up and what to do about it.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, I guess, doing the work in whatever way that we can to understand what's going on with us. And would you say there's a parallel then? Because to me, when you're describing this, and we use the term anxiety, and we have, technical mental disorder terms, and then we also have the idea of having like our mean girl syndrome, or like our inner voices. It feels like there's a lot of overlap in terms of the stories we're telling ourselves, or the feelings, the general feelings that we have. And all of these things are the things that, the word self-sabotage came into play. And I don't know that that's fair. I feel like that's like an adjacent conversation, but whatever is happening with ourself
Yeah,
is in
yeah.
fact sabotaging the situation.
Yeah, I used to use that term all the time, and my therapist challenged me on it because it's an important description, but it doesn't say everything. It doesn't tell you everything. And if you're constantly saying, yeah, I self-sabotage all the time, then you're not really like, why am I self-sabotaging? What's causing it to happen? Like, why do I keep getting in my own way? And why do I keep creating this cycle? Then my cycle lasted for a few decades. And that's why I would start something and it would be an okay run. Then I'd quit because it got too intense. Then I'd find myself back at it again because that internal voice just kept saying, don't give up, don't give up. But I didn't really understand how to listen to that voice till not recently, but like over the past couple of years. I started to really lean into it.
Yeah, what was the turning point for you where so you had this cycle, right? Where you couldn't help but want to be creative and to do these things, but then the anxiety would take over and be like, "Nope, we're not." And then something else was calling you to do it, and so you'd be in this cycle. What changed to help even encourage you, I guess, to break out of the cycle?
The first thing was one of my many moves out of New York City to upstate New York, which I've done probably 25 times over the past 20 years. That was all anxiety and just not learning about what all of that means. So when I was living in upstate New York the last time, I was part of a cabaret show. It was like a Halloween cabaret show. And I have a song that I was going to present, and people were like, wow, your voice is beautiful, and like all of that. So it's like going really well. And then when I get up to perform the song, that's when the anxiety starts. And then then you're like, shit, like, come on. Like, I know what I want to do. I know how to present. I know how to sing, but it's like this anxiety. So I think that's when I first said, okay, that's it. I can't do this anymore. I need to figure this out. And then cancer hit. When I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that just obviously just said, nope, you're going to stop and you're going to figure this out for sure because life is just precious. And doing that work, creative work, is very important to me that I can't give it up. I can't just go through life like my mom did and not have the tools and the coping skills to figure it out or to at least navigate anxiety while it's happening. And that's kind of what I've been learning to do. And it's proving to be working.
Oh, yeah, you got the life is precious call, and I feel that deeply and was like, okay, we got to figure this out. So, yeah, this is a really interesting idea too. And there have been conversations in my coaching world and, and therapy world of saying, okay, so there's this thing, whatever it is, that's stopping you, that's holding you back. And sometimes it's a voice inside your head. Sometimes it's a feeling in your body. It's a combination. And the first thing to do, and you have described it in your path, is being curious about it instead of being like, oh, this is ridiculous. What's wrong with me? And it's not that you may not have had those thoughts. I mean, I think we all do. But you were like, wait, how about we figure out why this is happening? And when you're curious, it takes that judgment out and allows you to explore it in a way where you're like, oh, I completely missed this aspect of it. This is what's going on. I love that. It's gentle, it's compassionate, very much in line with how I work, and it's effective. So you're seeing a difference. So you got curious about it. But then there's this other part of it. And this is what interests me so much, and why I was like, this is what we need to talk about, is this reframe that it's not only being curious. And a lot of times people will be like, you figured it out. Now, how do you get rid of it? That's not always a thing, the getting rid of it. It's more like, how do you live with it? So what did you do? What happened next? What are the things that you tried? And how have you come to live with it, basically?
Yeah, it's how you carry it, and it's something you carry with you for, the rest of your life. The turning point with me was understanding that it's a process, which is why I truly devote my own creative work towards having a creative process, and how I start from point A to Z when I'm creating something new. Like, you have to go through these steps. It's personal, sometimes it's technical, and that I never got. I never understood that. I used to think like, okay, I want to put on a show, my own solo show, and it's going to happen within a week. And then I realized when I tried that, it just falls to pieces. And I'm like, why does this happen? I'm like, oh, okay. You see other creatives, artists do this, and you're like, wow, it looks so easy. But like, no, they did the work, they did the groundwork to make it happen. And that's what I realized. I don't think I would have truly internalized that if I didn't realize what were those outside forces that were keeping me down. And it was my family, and it was a layer of grief and pain that I had to let go of. And I had to let go of family in a sense because it was not a very healthy, there were not healthy dynamics and a lot of unhealthy patterns that I had to look at. And for me to heal and to work through that, it was just a choice that I had to make. And once I did that, after my mom passed last year from dementia, when that whole event happened, usually that does create a huge shift within the family unit. And that's when everything just started to make sense. And that's when I started to really blossom. That's when I started to really notice this confidence level that has always been there, but it just started to blossom and come forth. What I really want to drive home is that it's all a process, and it's all something that, and like you said, to be gentle, to be curious about it, to lean into that, into the discomfort of all of that. And that's the hardest part of having anxiety, is not being able to sit with that pain or that discomfort. We just want to avoid it, and we try all these things like addiction, like alienating people, and all of that really fun stuff.
Oh my gosh, we've talked about, dealing with our emotions and our fears on the podcast. And that challenge of being able to sit with the discomfort is huge. You're right. That's why we have these maladaptive coping mechanisms, a mile long. And we're like, why didn't that work? Because it's true. It's like we've tried that because that's a Band-Aid, right? It's a block. And what we really have to do, that the best way, so we're like, the best way around it is through it. The best way through it is through it. It's like you have to keep going. Or my favorite is, if you're going through hell, don't stop. Right? Just keep going. We've talked about toxic positivity. We've talked about decluttering, and it's not actually called Decluttering People, but it's an episode about that. I'll link that in the show notes. But it is this idea. I mean, I say it tongue in cheek and I laugh a little bit, but I'm also very serious that when we understand what serves us and what doesn't, sometimes it's also who serves us and who doesn't. And it's especially painful when family doesn't, when they don't understand or they don't accept. And a lot of times it comes from lack of understanding. And it's, by the way, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And what you went through. And as you know, my mom had Alzheimer's as well. And that is, it's so much. But there is something beautiful in there that sounds like her passing was in part connected to your release of some things that were really holding you back.
Yeah, I think the cancer was really hard and the chemo was harder, but witnessing my mom go through that whole process, and like the whole dementia aspect just slowly creeping up, and then all of a sudden that the last part of it happens quickly.
Yeah.
And when you see your mom in that position, you're just ripped apart. And I never experienced that before, obviously. And I think that's part of the whole cracking open of everything and seeing things. And also, like, I also realized too on this journey is that I have a part in this too, like in the family conflict. That was probably another big takeaway from healing and growing, is knowing that it's not always about the other people who are part of this conflict. I also participate in it in some certain way that also triggers other people, who ticks other people off. So yeah, that was huge because I needed to own my part. That's probably the only way I was going to really make it through, is like seeing how I showed up.
It can be so tricky to own your part and also understand too that no matter what, you being you will trigger others potentially. It's as simple as that. As much as, I want to be liked, but, not that much, not to my own detriment. And coming to those terms is really key. I made some notes as you were talking. Anyone who knows me knows that's happening. And so the things I wrote down is really coming to understand what triggers you. It feels like a combination of things. I feel as though the conversation around, anxiety and what we're trying to achieve, right? Our success, and in this case, creativity, whatever it is that you want. It's always like, well, reduce the anxiety, get rid of the anxiety, reduce the whatever. And I'm all about stress management. I'm all about, finding ways to reduce the triggers. So I don't think we can deny that that's part of it. Understanding your triggers, and can you create an environment that will reduce them
Yeah.
and have them happen less frequently. And part of that could also very well be releasing people in your life that are those triggers. So that's one part of it. Then the idea that it is a process and you continue to work at it, you practice, you try something, you go, oops, that didn't work, right? Then you find ways to heal and release. I also wrote down the word acceptance. And I think that's part of it, saying, for example, I'm a person living with anxiety. Okay. Same idea to me as the family that I have. I say I live in a sea of ADHD. My husband, my kiddos, I'm pretty sure my mother-in-law, you name it, everyone. If I have it, we're pretending to ignore that because I can't afford to have it at this point. But in all seriousness, the thing that we talk about all the time is you are an amazing, intelligent, talented, creative person who happens to have ADHD. And it's the same idea, right? Whether it's anxiety or anything else. You could be all of these things and you're a person who can't quite walk that well because you have a limp. It doesn't matter what it is. It's you are the person first and all of these amazing things with your heart and your soul first. So I think that acceptance of, well, but I also happen to have this thing that can hold me back or not, depending upon how I work with it. And then leaning into the discomfort, I think that's so important. And then the last part that you just mentioned is owning your part, owning who you are. And I think that goes along with acceptance because some of it can be, okay, I don't have to, on principle, do certain things to trigger others to like spark the war, but also I get to choose who I am, how I live, what I do, and I can accept that maybe that does trigger them. And it's an agree to disagree. It's okay, I'm stepping away. I'm not allowing this to come into my energy. That's so important because sometimes nothing changes except our perspective.
That's 100% true. Absolutely. The whole family unit has a certain degree of narcissistic injury, psychologically, what it's called. And it's a thing where that part of you gets fractured a little bit. And so you have this thing where you're just a little narcissistic, like you think it's everybody else's fault. And once I was able to lean into that, that was the gold, that was the gift. And your bullet points, the things that you wrote down, like are just so on point.
So this narcissistic injury, is that the phrase that you called it? Is this where someone has stepping into narcissism, if you will? And was it your understanding that, oh, that's what's happening with them? So I get it now.
So it's, I have part of that too. It's like, okay, I'm also a little bit of that too.
Yeah.
I've worked through a lot of it and I still have a ways to go, but I see how it manifests in my family. And that's probably the hardest thing because I guess deep down inside it would be really wonderful to mend all of that because there were some really great moments in terms of laughter and, sarcasm that family has. And there's a lot of that good stuff, but that just didn't take precedence over the deeper wounded parts
that you needed to heal in order to be able to move on and thrive. So you can have gratitude for pieces of the puzzle, but not necessarily say that you're going to keep everything because of that. You're allowed to acknowledge, that there were moments that were good and then also release it for your benefit. So good for you because that is not easy to do. So there was a lot of work involved in terms of it being a process and figuring out ways to, I'm trying to think of the word mitigate, some of the triggers and the things like that, doing that kind of work. But then there's also this other element of acceptance and knowing this is part of you and maybe using that to your advantage. And I'm curious, would you say that maybe having had it and having this awareness has been an advantage?
The awareness of something up within
Yeah,
myself.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And having this block, having this, realizing it's anxiety, almost being forced to learn more about yourself, if you will.
absolutely. And in my 20s, I wasn't too self aware, but a friend of mine was studying to be a music therapist. And then she was just totally into all of that. So that's sort of what introduced me to personal development and healing. I was in my 20s. But 30s, 40s, throughout that whole time, even though I was struggling, there was this awareness. There was this part of me that was like, no, there's something more than this. I just don't know what it is. It's probably going to take me forever to figure it out. And I didn't even think that way, but there was just still an instinct telling me, like, there's more to this. Don't stop, keep going.
It feels like, in a way, that anxiety could be a sign of the deeper things that you need to be curious about and that you can potentially heal. So, with that, what tips can you leave us with? Because, again, you may work to heal it and there may be a lot that you can, but you live with it. It's still part of you. It's the kind of thing, we all know this, and just like clutter in your world, you can be like, I conquered it, yay. And then it comes rushing back and you're like, I don't got it. So,
Yes.
what would you say? First of all, just stepping away today and being like, "Oh yeah, that's exactly what's happening. I'm like sort of hitting this wall. What do we need to do, and what are some things that can help us in this process?"
Yeah, so when I start, let's say I'm going to rehearse a song, or I'm going to continue writing the script for my show, and every time I sit down or stand up to rehearse or do something, that anxiety starts. And I did not realize that was my pattern, and that was my pattern forever. When I took a class or when I performed, before I actually started, that anxiety would swell up, and then I would take that anxiety into my performances or into whatever without any kind of damage control.
Mm.
So over the years, that became the behavior, that became what was me. So when I start something new, automatic, the anxiety just starts. And I didn't know how to navigate that. So today, the takeaway would be interruption. Finding a way, learning a way to interrupt that before you fulfill that dynamic, you fulfill that. So when I'm rehearsing a song in the studio, the anxiety starts up and I start singing, then I have to say, no, I have to stop. Take a moment, pause, just really lean into that feeling. And then it starts to melt away a little bit. I mean, it keeps coming back throughout the rehearsal, but I know how to interrupt that. So I'm starting to become more confident, because when I'm in the studio rehearsing, that anxiety prompts me to keep looking at the door. Oh my God, is anybody listening? Oh my God, I feel so shy. Oh my, like all this stuff comes up. But now I'm able to just be more confident and more and that's when I'm noticing my voice is becoming stronger and more available, rather than, yes, he's a really good singer, but there's some disconnection happening between the voice and the emotion and being grounded. So I think that's a huge takeaway for those who are stuck creatively. You're going to sit down to start something, then that anxiety kicks in, and you just have to get in there and figure out how to disrupt it.
I love that. Yeah. So the first thing I wrote down is, as we get curious, is noticing the pattern, right? Finding where the triggers are. And then before you said interruption, I wrote down, don't bring it with you. And that's exactly the answer. How do you not bring it with you? And I'm thinking about other conversations we've had here relating to stress management and this idea of, so you have your fight or flight, right? So your body's lit up, and then you also have your rest and digest, and you want to go into that calm area that allows you to think and to process and to create and to do. And so switching between the two, for example, you want to become more calm before you sit down to eat, because your body actually won't process the nutrients as well If you are in fight or flight mode, you may not even be as hungry because that will happen. A lot of systems shut down and redirect when you are in a stress response. So it's, I think, a very similar idea. And then you also don't want to take it with you because, if you are stressed, you're not going to absorb the nutrients as well. You are potentially going to eat too fast, which can cause digestion issues. I mean, there's so many things. And we've done this. We've all done this where we're like in go mode and we're like fighting with somebody and everything's like, and all lit up. And then we just like shove food in our mouth so fast. We're like, did I just eat? So I'm using that as one example, right?
Yeah.
So a similar idea is understanding where those triggers are and then finding that interruption. And I'm immediately thinking of all kinds. The one that I work with my clients that I'm trying to share more of is like little mini guided meditations, or a quick breath work exercise. And then I'm also thinking about people use tapping. So there's all kinds of different ways, but even as simple as stepping away, finding the interruption. That's awesome, Gregory. Okay. Any other final thoughts or encouragement or an idea to share?
Yeah, once you develop that, if you can interrupt it and do something that is more affirming, more loving and gentle, and the more you do it, the more awareness you gain. And the more, for me, it's turned into this, okay, so this anxiety is really intense right now. But guess what? I'm going to channel that into this piece that I'm working on. At that place where the coping skill has turned into leaning into that intensity and then feeling the emotion. And then when you're performing or doing that thing, you're going to be moved and I might cry or I might well up somehow and just feel totally emotional. And that's the part that I lean into. And that's the part I really hold on to as a coping skill rather than avoid it. I'm going to integrate it into my work and I'm going to pour all of that into whatever I'm doing, a performance, and especially because that's probably one of the most important aspects of it. You want to present something and you want to invite the audience to go on this journey with you and not be like, oh, he looks nervous or, oh, wait, okay, like cause confusion.
I think this part it's the kind of thing that I want to do what I call an auditory highlight. Like you said it out loud, but I want to like take the highlighter and be like, notice this, circle it, channeling it. But if I understand correctly, at least this is how I would perceive it and how I've experienced it. Having anxiety that blocks you is not something you can channel. But if you have the tools and the acceptance to work with it, then you can calm it and take that energy. And it's almost like a metamorphosis, if you will, or almost like a transmogrification. Let's bring Calvin and Hobbes into this transmogrifier, okay? Where you're changing, you're modifying it so you can still use that anxious energy, but you can channel it into what you're creating.
Yes, that is
Interesting.
perfect.
So yeah, with that, this idea that it's not only about not allowing the anxiety to block you, but also that you can take that energy and redistribute it in a different way, that you can channel it in. And do I understand correctly that that channeling comes from that process of working with it in this healthy way? It almost feels like taking the energy and moving it into using it for love and not fear.
Yes. That's what I was going to say because of your wonderful inspiration for note taking while we're talking. That's a great way to keep, like, if you have anxiety, that's a really great way to stay on point with the conversation that we're having. So I really appreciate that. It's the epitome of creative practice for me is integrating the anxiety into my work. That is creative practice. That is a creative process because it's deeply personal to me and it's how I move through anxiety so I can create art that I'm happy with. So yeah, that's part of the creative process practice that I try to teach people.
Yeah, I just keep thinking, changing the fear to love, right?
To love, yes, it is love, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like loving yourself more, and in turn, you'll be able to love other people.
Yeah, and bring more of yourself to others because that's really whether it's singing or or painting or whatever the creative process is, or even, we've talked about this before on the podcast as well, the creative process can be, what you create as a coach and you bring to the world in terms of your innovation in business.
Yeah, that is so true. I really love how you put that.
And so this idea that even if we're like, oh, this is tough, even if you have this anxiety, you can take it and manipulate it in a wonderful way and roll it into something amazing. Thank you, Gregory. I love that. I think that's a brilliant place for us to wrap up.
Yay. Okay. It was so fun.
Yeah. Now we have the rapid wrap up, the little bonus fun part at the end. Before we get into that, where can we find you online?
You can find me at gregoryhalpen.com. That's my main squeeze, my main website.
Okay.
And you can find me on Instagram, same name, Gregory Halpen, and TikTok and the others, but it's the same.
We'll make sure to put that in the show notes so you can find Gregory. And now, are you ready for the rapid wrap up? It's just 3 things I'd love to hear from you: a song, a saying, and a resource of some kind, all that contribute to your positively living.
Okay, yes. The song that just immediately comes to mind is Suddenly by Billy Ocean, 1980s.
Ooh.
It was when I had my first kiss with a boy in my 8th grade class.
Ooh, love that.
Very amazing.
Oh, and Billy Ocean, just so so intense and romantic. Go you.
It was playing on the radio, We're just 2 teenagers doing what teenagers do.
I love that. How about a saying?
Own my part. Own my part. Own my part.
I love that. Responsibility, right? And then a resource could be a book, an app, anything really.
Yeah, so I will recommend Twyla Tharp, who is a choreographer. She wrote a book called The Creative Habit.
Ooh.
And it kind of touches on what I teach too. It's and she, I pull from her a lot. She has been very inspirational. And she helps you understand how to create healthy creative habits so you can just keep creating, so you can keep putting your work out there in a way that's life-changing and culture-changing and all of that good stuff.
Oh, I love that. I will definitely add that into the list of books that we have on my favorites and resources page. So we'll add that so we can find that there. And then one last little bonus thing, Gregory. What are you grateful for?
In this very, very, very present moment, you and this opportunity. And I'm not, not just, I could be teary right now because it's very important. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm grateful for this.
Right back at you. I am grateful for you, that we connected, that we are able to collaborate like this. And I want to thank you, Gregory, for shining your light so beautifully in this world and for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Lisa.
I hope this conversation leaves you feeling inspired and ready to redirect your anxious energy into creativity. If you'd like to explore some of the topics we discussed more deeply, I encourage you to check out episode 168 on Toxic People Detox, episode 99 on emotions and intuition, and episode 182 on internal family systems, where we learn more about the parts of ourselves and the roles they play in blocks like this. Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.